Okay, welcome to my 14th video, and this one is about laying out styling of the document. Well, we can't go into too much, but I actually want to introduce you to the concept of something called a div. A div is short for division, but let's have a look at what I've got on the page at this current moment in time. What we have here is the HTML, and it's everything you've seen already. I've already got the doc type, so I'm now defining this document as HTML5. I've got the HTML tag to end HTML, so the HTML element is there. I've got the meta section, the head section, with two meta elements, title and the link to the style sheet. This is a CSS, so this is inside a folder called CSS, and the style sheet are called divs.css. I've then got the body, the content of the document, and it's only got the heading 1 and it's got a paragraph, and you can see that's applied here. The other thing you can notice is that there's no styling here, and yet it is appearing green, red text. The heading 1 is as normal. So something is affecting the look of this document, and that obviously is the CSS. The CSS is saying to it, I want you to make the background green and the text red and the font slightly bigger. In a moment I'll look at the div. Let's just look at the document overall. There's the index.html, and it refers to, as I said up here, it refers to CSS folder. That's there, and you can see that that's the divs.css that this part refers to. Okay, at the moment you can see that the document, this lays on the side over here, and that's just as we've seen the whole way through these videos, because I've done no real formatting on here very much at all. What I'm going to now do is I'm going to introduce you to this new element called div. There's the div tag, and here is the end div tag. There you go, that's it. Let's see the impact that has on the web page. Okay, just to check that I have pressed F5, I'm going to press the repeat, and you'll notice absolutely nothing has changed. That's because by itself this is simply what we term a container. It does exist on the page, but it's not doing anything. It's simply there on the page. It's not functioning, it's not performing any duty, it's not having any impact on the page. It's slightly slowing down the web page minutely because this is adding to the file that's got to be downloaded. What I need to do is I need to mix the HTML div with a CSS command, and what I'm going to do is, rather than style, I'm going to actually refer to something directly in the CSS document. I'm going to say id equals main. I'm going to save that. Now I'm going to press F5, and you can see suddenly there's a difference. I have typed this in, and now we've got a box surrounding my text. It's moved all the text into the center of the document. The gap here and here is equal. If I maximize this document, you'll notice that the gap is equal. This box is in the center horizontally in my document, not vertically, just horizontally. Okay. So how have I done that? Well, clearly that's not in here. It's got to be in the CSS. So let's have a look at the CSS. There it is. This is the first part. The body statement made the background green. We knew that. We'd seen that before. The paragraph text was made to look red. That's that line here, and slightly bigger than normal, 140 pixels. Sorry, 140%. The 140% tells it to be 40% larger than it normally would. That means that if I've got a much larger screen definition, then this will change in relationship to whatever it's set to be. So it will make it larger or smaller given what normally is seen. So that's what we've seen before. That's just normal. It's this part here that changes. It's this part of the CSS. Notice curly brackets, by the way. Don't put rounded brackets. It must be curved brackets. Shift and the square bracket symbols will get you these, and that will produce the begin and end markers. Inside of there I've got margin auto. Now margins are things outside of the div. They are to the left, to the right, to the top and to the bottom. Margin auto, if I set it to auto, what it's trying to do is ignoring the top and bottom margins. And it's trying to balance the left and right so they're the same. Now if the left and right margins are the same, the box must be in the center. Just to show you that there is a top margin, If I get the right command, that would always be helpful. That's actually not the correct command, but let's just stick on, finish that off. It should be margin top. Save that, refresh, and you can see that the top margin is there. There is no bottom margin, but I could add that to push space between this box and anything else, and I can get rid of that. You will notice as well that when I clear the top margin, that this still doesn't go flush against the top. That's an Internet Explorer thing, and it is incredibly easy to solve. That you'll find things on the web telling you complex ways of doing it. It is a doddle to solve, but that's not for this this video to sort out. So that centers height. Pretty obvious what height is. That's the gap from the top to the bottom. There are 300 pixels from there downwards. Width. If I hadn't have defined a width, then this div would be the full size of my window. Therefore, the centering would have made no sense at all, and my text would have still appeared on the side. So I've gone for a width of 500 pixels. There's 500 pixels from the left side to the right side. This part says border 1 pixel. So this border that runs around the outside is 1 pixel wide. It's a solid pixel, so not dotted, not dashed, and I've told it to be blue, and there's a blue colour tinge to it. I've put the hash in front of the word main. Now you'll notice on the original that I just said main. That's because the hash tells the CSS this is an ID. So the hash is essential. It says this is an ID and this ID is called main. So in the HTML I can refer to that ID equals main, and the CSS knows what to hand over. So it's really simple to utilize this. There are other things you can do. Worth noting, by the way, that we don't do anything like hashes at the front of these. These are standard commands, body and paragraph. These are built into HTML. So anything built into HTML that you use within the content section of your document can be modified by CSS. I'll show you. We've got H1 there. Let me put an H1 in. Curved brackets, color, and let's make this blue as well. So all I've done is save that, and it's affected immediately the heading one. If I wanted to center the text, I'd need to center it within the element in which it's sitting, which in this case is here, and I would center it there. I don't want to do that because that will center both lines, but I will show you. All you've got to do then is put text align center, and then you'll see the text is aligned. As soon as I remove it from the CSS, it affects the HTML. So the styling, this is why I said very first thing, CSS is about styling. There are important factors to remember when dealing with divs. The ID is essential. There are alternatives that you need to be aware of. Divs are fantastic for layouts. People used to use tables. Tables are cumbersome, they're awkward to use, and they're slow to load onto a browser. Divs are much faster to load. You can also put divs inside of divs and structure them. If you ever look at the web page, you'll start to see that the div container is the part that actually gives you all the layout. All those little boxes you see on web pages that can be moved around are in themselves divs. Show you actually what you can do with this. For example, if I change the background color of the main document to black, then what I can do is do that, and that affects the whole page. But if I put the color in here, make that white, now I've got white background. I could extend this out, so if I start to make, let's say that I make this 900 pixels wide, then you can see it's much nearer. If I set the height to, let's say, 700 pixels high, I can start to see that this document is starting to take over the page. It looks like the standard part of the document. I could have another div in here. I can use things called floats to allow them to move to the left or move to the right or however else I want to it. Again, that's not for this video to deal with, but be aware the div is actually the building block of every page. So there are other things you need to be aware of. Along with margins, there are other features. Margins are fantastic, but notice the text is flush up against the side. So I need to add in padding. I'm going to add a padding of 10 pixels. Now a padding, I'll just save that. Does that. Now I'm hoping you notice something. It actually didn't move the text in, but the edge of this div moved out. Now I didn't change its width, it's still 900 pixels wide, and yet the distance between here on the left hand side and the right hand side increased. If you didn't see it, let me show you this again. So save that. There. Put the code back. Oops, really badly do that. Right. Okay, so I've now saved that. Just do that again just to confirm. Just keep an eye just here next to the S. You're expecting this line. What I'll try and do, I can't put the cursor there, but if I put the cursor right next to the S, notice what's going to happen. If I press F5, the whole div has widened. Now why is that happening if the width itself is not changing? And that's a vitally important piece of information that you've got to be aware of when dealing with divs. So let's have a look at what I mean. Okay, this is called the box model, and this is what divs work on. This inner section, this white area with the slight dotted line, the dotted line is not meant to be there, it's just showing you the edge of the box, but imagine it's not there. That is my div. So when I define the width of this div, let's say I define it as 900, then the gap from this edge here to this edge here is actually 900 pixels. If I then define padding, that padding is added on top of my 900. So this padding here and this one here increases the width of my overall box model. The div itself is there, but the overall div extends further. I then have the border. Now if you remember, I had a border of 1 pixel. Therefore, this has now added 1 pixel here to the width of my div. 900 pixels, then 10 pixels for padding, and then 1 pixel for the border. And then I had a margin, and the margin itself adds to the size of the box model. So if I define, as I did back here, if I define the width as 900, the padding as 10, and the border as 1 pixel, then I'm actually not got a div of 900 pixels. The question is, if I do have that dimension, 900, 10 for padding, 1 for the border, and 10 for the margin, then what actually is the size of the box that the div defines? So let's have a look. This is the structure. I've now called it hash, that's an ID sum name. So sum name, this is the name of the div. So it doesn't matter what it is, this is told it's an ID. Curve brackets, margin 10, padding 10, border 1 pixel, height 100, width 100. It's a simple square model. Let's think about the total size that this is. The total is equal to the width plus the border plus the padding plus the margin. But remember, you're talking about the border each side, the padding each side, and the margin each side. So the calculation is 10 times the margin, 2 times the margin, 2 times 10, twice times the padding, 2 times 10, twice times the border, 2 times 1, plus the width you've defined, 100. That makes it 20 pixels wide for the margin, 20 for the padding, 2 for the border, and a height of width of 100, which gives you a total div dimension of 142 pixels. So if you've assigned 100 pixels to this object inside a box and you're wondering why it's not fitting, it's because if you've got other dimensions, the box is bigger than you think it is. The width does not tell you everything. Obviously with this one, that would be applied to the height as well as the width. Okay. So there are two ways of defining something. First of all, there's the hash. The hash, and the alternative is a full stop. The hash is ID, and you saw that in the code that I gave you. ID equals, and in speech marks, main. But I could have quite easily used a full stop, and that means a class. Instead of writing ID equals, I would write class equals. So the question is, when would I use which one? Why would I use ID over class? Well, ID is really simple. You use an ID when you only require that ID to be used once per page. So if you've got a div that you want a dimension or anything, you can apply IDs to lots of things, but let's use a div as an example. If I know, for example, I've got the main div and I'm only ever going to use it once on a page, then it will be an ID. But if I know or believe that I'm going to use it more than once, then I use a class. I might, for example, surround text with a div and hyperlink that div and therefore create a button. And therefore I might say I want lots of buttons. That would become a class. I might have class equals, and in speech marks div button or something like that. There is a question about that. The question is, well, if I can use a class for only one instance, then why do I bother having ID at all? And the answer is convention. You could make everything a class. It just would be wrong. It would be wrong in the terms of convention. It would work. You wouldn't be breaking any rules. It's not illegal. It's just considered poor programming. So if I want to define an ID, then hash main is what I would write within the CSS. Hash main. In the HTML, I would refer to class equals main. That's when I want one div or one item, and that's the only time that ID is going to be used on that page. If I want it as a class, I put a full stop in front of the inside the CSS, and that now turns it into a class. In the HTML, I would use class equals, and that's when I would want to use it once or more times. A relatively good example of when to use this, by the way, would be on the P marker. I might decide I want to create a class called bold. This font weight or not equals semicolon. Font weight equals is colon bold. That then is a class. I can now go to my paragraph marker and I can actually say in there class equals bold. My font is now bold. And the reason why I've used a class is because I might want to put another paragraph without it, but I might decide that I want to have another instance of it. There we go. And the class is now being applied to this one, and I've used the class twice. So that's being applied. Those are quite advanced features. These are the beginnings of really styling your website. Please do not follow these color codes or systems. It's horrible. But it is the beginning of creating a layout. We're beginning to see the power of CSS. Very simply, to create this kind of look, I've only used some very basic structures. The way I've laid this out is the way I lay this out. It's the way I like to do it. Not necessarily how other people will. You don't have to do this. I like tabbing things in because it makes sense to me. The way I lay my documents out is my personal way. Until you've got your own personal way, you may want to copy mine. You may wish to think that's a useless idea, I'll go my own way. Purely up to you. I really hope that's been useful. It's certainly been very detailed. See you in video 15.